I used to believe that blood was thicker than water. People repeat that phrase all the time, do they not? It is one of those comfortable little lies we tell ourselves to justify the toxic behavior of the people who happen to share our genetics. We use it to excuse the inexcusable. We use it to forgive the unforgivable. But on the night my own sister shoved my chair away from a table I had paid for, looked me dead in the eye, and sneered that they do not sit with poor, useless losers, I realized the truth. Blood is not thicker than water. It just stains much worse. And my family had been leaving their dirty, greedy fingerprints all over my life for 31 years. When I heard her say those words, and worse, when I heard my parents laugh and agree with her, something inside me just snapped. It was not a loud, dramatic snap. It was quiet. It was cold. It was the sound of a heavy steel door shutting forever, sealing off a vault they had been raiding for years. For nearly a decade, I had been their ultimate safety net. I was the one keeping a roof over my parents' heads. I was the one funding my sister Vivian's grand illusions of being a luxury lifestyle influencer. I poured hundreds of thousands of dollars into their lives, stupidly thinking that if I just gave enough, worked hard enough, and sacrificed enough of my own happiness, they would finally look at me with love. But they did not love me. They loved my wallet. And in that one fleeting moment of public humiliation, my sister made a very expensive mistake. She reminded me that I was the one holding the purse strings, and she gave me the exact motivation I needed to cut them. If you are listening to this, you might be wondering how a family dynamic gets this bad without someone walking away sooner. You might be asking yourself why someone would let themselves be treated like a personal ATM for years on end. Believe me, I ask myself the exact same question every single day now. Family drama is rarely a sudden explosion. It does not happen overnight. It is a slow poison. It drips into your life drop by drop, cleverly disguised as duty, loyalty, and obligation, until you are drowning in it and you cannot even remember what fresh air tastes like. But I did not just sit there and drown. I stood up. I looked at the people who had drained me dry, and I walked away. And over the next 48 hours, I systematically dismantled the fake, luxurious empire they had built on my dime. But before I tell you exactly how I took back every single thing I owned, and how I watched my sister's fake luxury lifestyle crumble into dust, you need to understand the foundation of our family. You need to see the years of deep, quiet betrayal that led to that dining room. My name is Maeve. I am 31 years old, and I run a mid-sized logistics company. I build supply chains for a living. I am very good at organizing chaos, moving resources from point A to point B, and solving complex problems under extreme pressure. My entire career is built on efficiency. Ironically, my family treated me exactly like one of my supply chains. I was a free, endless flow of resources meant to serve their needs, and my own needs were irrelevant. I am sitting in my home office right now as I recount this. The room is quiet. The only sound is the soft hum of my computer tower and the occasional car passing by outside my window. The large oak desk in front of me is covered in thick ledgers, printed bank statements, and stacks of highlighted emails. These pieces of paper tell the true story of my family. They show the mathematical truth about my father Thaddeus, a former insurance salesman who always gave loud, booming speeches about family loyalty while quietly spending my hard-earned money on his golf club memberships. They show the truth about my mother Gwendolyn, a master manipulator who could cry on demand to get whatever she wanted, using guilt as a weapon sharper than any knife. And they show the truth about Vivian, my younger sister, the golden child of the family. Vivian is 28 years old. She proudly calls herself a lifestyle founder. In reality, she runs a failing luxury fashion boutique that bleeds money every single month. She wears designer clothes, drives a luxury European car, and posts highly curated, aesthetic photos for her thousands of followers. None of it is real. None of it was earned by her own two hands. I paid for the clothes. I paid for the car. I paid the exorbitant rent for her ridiculous store in the upscale downtown district. I paid for the illusion that she was better than everyone else. And she rewarded my generosity by treating me like garbage on the bottom of her designer shoes. I am staring at my banking screen right now, looking at the zeros, and I am not angry anymore. I am just tired. I am ready to sever the supply chain once and for all. I want to show you exactly how a person who has been pushed into a corner finally decides to fight back. But to truly grasp the sheer satisfaction of the revenge, we have to go back to the beginning. We have to walk through my personal museum of pain. Because the public humiliation at that fancy dinner table was just the final exhibit in a very long, very painful collection of memories. Are you ready to see what happens when the invisible child finally decides to turn on the lights? Every family has a history. It is usually a collection of memories, photographs, and shared stories that shape who they are. My collection is less of a photo album and more of a detailed ledger of betrayals. The first major exhibit in this museum of pain takes me back to when I was 18 years old. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late spring. I remember the exact smell of the air, crisp and full of the promise of summer. I had just run up the long gravel driveway of our childhood home with a thick white envelope clutched in my shaking hands. It was my acceptance letter to a prestigious state university, along with a notification of a partial academic scholarship. I was ecstatic. I had studied until my eyes burned, working 3 different part-time jobs just to save up for the remaining tuition costs. I was a waitress on weekends, I walked dogs early in the morning, and I tutored younger kids in math. I knew my parents had a college fund for me. They had talked about it for years, promising that if I got the grades, they would handle the rest. I burst through the front door, waving the envelope. Thaddeus was sitting in his worn leather recliner, reading the newspaper. Gwendolyn was sitting on the sofa, aggressively filing her nails. I showed them the letter, my heart pounding against my ribs. I waited for the pride. I waited for the warm congratulations, the hugs, the celebration. Instead, Thaddeus lowered his paper, cleared his throat loudly, and looked over at my mother. Gwendolyn gave me a tight, incredibly uncomfortable smile. She patted the sofa cushion next to her. She told me in a soft, overly practiced voice that the college fund was gone. All of it. Every single penny they had saved. I froze. I asked her what she meant, my voice barely a whisper. She sighed heavily, continuing to play with her nail file, and explained that Vivian was going through a very hard time in high school. Vivian, who was 15 at the time, felt lost, uninspired, and desperately needed to find herself. So, they had used my entire college fund to send Vivian on a 6-month cultural exploration trip to Italy. They bought her first-class plane tickets, paid for a luxury homestay in Florence, and gave her a massive monthly shopping allowance. My future, my grueling hard work, was traded in an instant for my younger sister's European vacation. Thaddeus looked at me and said I was smart and capable. He told me I could figure it out on my own. Vivian, he insisted, was sensitive and needed the support to thrive. That was the exact day I learned my dreams were nothing more than spare change to fund Vivian's desires. The second exhibit in my museum is my 21st birthday. A milestone most people celebrate with their closest friends, loving family, and a sense of stepping joyfully into adulthood. I spent my 21st birthday working a double shift at a greasy, run-down local diner on the edge of town. I was exhausted to my bones. My feet ached with a dull, throbbing pain, my hair smelled strongly of old fry oil and stale coffee, and my hands were raw and blistered from washing endless piles of dishes when the busboy decided not to show up for his shift. I was working those grueling hours to pay for my community college classes because the big university dream had been stolen from me 3 years prior. I finally clocked out at midnight. I walked out to my beat-up used car in the empty, poorly lit parking lot and checked my phone. There was one single text message from my mother. It arrived at 11:45 at night. It just said, "Happy birthday, Maeve. We will celebrate later when things calm down." I sat in the driver's seat and opened my social media. The very first thing on my feed was a post from Vivian. She was not wishing me a happy birthday. She was posting dozens of pictures from her own early birthday celebration. She was turning 18 soon. The photos showed a lavish, fully catered party at a fancy country club venue. There were massive ice sculptures, a huge 5-tiered cake, a professional DJ, My parents had spent $10,000 on a party for her, while I was scrubbing thick grease off cheap plates just to afford my accounting textbooks. I sat in that dark, cold parking lot, gripped the steering wheel, and cried until my chest physically hurt. I promised myself that night I would never rely on them for anything ever again. I would build my own life, brick by brick. And I did. That brings us to the third exhibit. Fast forward several years. I had worked my way up the corporate ladder with brutal determination, saved every penny I could, learned the logistics industry inside and out, and finally took the terrifying leap to start my own company. I put everything I had on the line. I signed the lease on a modest, dusty warehouse space on the industrial side of the city. It smelled like wet concrete and diesel fuel, but it was mine. I invited my family to a small ribbon-cutting ceremony I put together myself. I bought a cheap red ribbon from a craft store, a pair of oversized novelty scissors, and 2 boxes of grocery store pastries. I just wanted them to see what I had built with my own hands. I desperately wanted them to be proud of the daughter who figured it out on her own despite everything. I stood in that empty warehouse for 3 agonizing hours. The pastries went stale. The coffee got cold and bitter. They never showed up. When I finally called my mother, her voice was casual, entirely untroubled by my silence on the other end. She told me they had to cancel because Vivian's purebred poodle had an emergency grooming appointment, and Vivian was too anxious to drive the dog across town by herself. My parents chose a dog's luxury haircut over the launch of my entire future and career. I hung up the phone, stood alone in the quiet warehouse, took the plastic scissors, and cut the red ribbon by myself. Have you ever tried to convince yourself that if you just reached one more milestone, if you just made a little more money, your parents would finally see your true value? I did. I thought financial success would be the ultimate key to unlocking their respect. I was tragically wrong. Success did not bring their respect, it only brought out their deep, unyielding greed. But how exactly did I go from being the ignored, independent daughter to the primary funding source for their lavish lifestyle? That is where the story takes an even darker turn. My logistics company grew much faster than I ever dared to imagine. Logistics is not a glamorous industry. There are no red carpets or magazine covers. It is about brutal efficiency, late nights staring at spreadsheets, tracking delayed freight shipments across the country, and solving massive headaches when supply chains break down. But it pays incredibly well if you're good at it. And I was exceptionally good at it. Within a few short years, I was making a significant, 6-figure income. I bought myself a small, quiet house in a safe neighborhood. I heavily invested my money. I continued to wear the same simple button-down shirts and practical slacks because I did not care about showing off wealth. I only cared about security and peace of mind. Vivian, on the other hand, cared only about the performance. When she turned 25, she suddenly decided she was a fashion visionary. She demanded that our parents help her open a high-end luxury boutique in the most expensive, trendy part of the downtown district. Thaddeus and Gwendolyn, blinded by their obsession with her, thought this was a brilliant idea. They took out a massive second mortgage on their family home just to fund her aesthetic dreams. They bought into her delusion wholeheartedly. The boutique was an absolute disaster from day one. She sold overpriced, impractical, uncomfortable clothing that nobody in our city actually wanted to buy. She hired her equally shallow friends to stand around drinking iced lattes while completely ignoring the few customers who wandered in. She spent the entire operating budget on lavish launch parties, custom velvet hangers, and imported champagne for her aesthetic social media posts. Within 6 months, the initial investment was entirely gone, and the aggressive debt collectors started calling their home. That was exactly when the dynamic of our family truly shifted. That was the moment I transformed from the invisible disappointment into the bottomless pit they threw all their financial problems into. It started exactly 3 years ago. Gwendolyn came to my house early one Sunday morning. She was crying. Real, heavy, dramatic tears rolling down her face. She sat at my kitchen table, gripping her coffee mug, and told me that Thaddeus was incredibly stressed. She said his heart could not take the pressure, and they were going to lose the family house because of the second mortgage they took out for Vivian. She reached across the table and grabbed my hands tightly. She begged me to help my sister just a little bit. She looked me in the eyes and used her favorite weapon, telling me that family must always protect family. I know what you are thinking. I should have said no. Looking back now, with the clarity I have, I know I should have slammed the door in her face. But I was still that little 18-year-old girl waving the college acceptance letter, desperately hoping for a crumb of validation. I wanted to be the hero for once. I wanted them to look at me, see my success, and finally realize I was the capable, worthy daughter. So, I paid the overdue mortgage. I wrote a check for $5,200. I explicitly told myself and them that it was a strict one-time thing to get them back on their feet. But a one-time thing quickly mutated into a rigid monthly expectation. Once they realized I had access to serious money, they completely stopped trying to manage their own. The one-time payment of $5,200 turned into me paying their entire mortgage every single month without fail. Then, Vivian's boutique lease was up for renewal, and her credit score was ruined from unpaid vendor bills. My mother wept in my living room again. My father puffed out his chest and talked sternly about protecting the family legacy and supporting local business. So, like a fool, I co-signed the commercial lease for her failing store. I became the sole financial guarantor. Then came the luxury credit cards. Vivian claimed she needed to maintain her image as a successful, wealthy lifestyle founder to attract high-end clients. She insisted she needed a luxury vehicle to park outside the boutique. So, my company bought a sleek, brand-new BMW under our corporate LLC for tax deduction purposes, and I stupidly let Vivian drive it as if it were her own. I also gave her a secondary credit card attached to my personal account for what I called strict emergency business expenses. Before I knew it, I was bleeding nearly $10,000 a month just to keep their fake, hollow lives afloat. Did I get a thank you? Never. I got deep, simmering resentment. The more money I gave, the more Vivian seemed to actively hate me. I realize now that my money was a constant, glaring reminder of her own total failure. She masked her crippling insecurity with extreme arrogance. I will never forget the specific day she visited my warehouse. It was the middle of a sweltering summer. The warehouse was incredibly loud, busy, and smelled heavily of damp cardboard, dust, and diesel exhaust from the idling trucks. I was in my small glass office, wearing a bright yellow high-visibility vest over my work clothes, rapidly checking manifest logs. The door swung open violently and Vivian walked in. She was wearing a pristine white silk suit, holding a bag that cost more than my first car, and she was literally pinching her nose. She looked around my bustling office like it was a toxic waste dump. She did not say hello. She did not ask how I was doing. She walked straight up to my desk, pulled a crumpled credit card statement out of her designer bag, and tossed it aggressively onto my computer keyboard. It was the bill for the emergency card I had given her. The listed emergencies included a weekend luxury spa retreat, 3 pairs of ridiculous red-bottom shoes, and a $2,000 dinner tab at a steakhouse. I looked down at the massive bill, then slowly looked up at her. I asked her calmly what this was. She rolled her eyes, sighed heavily as if I was wasting her precious time, and said, "Those are my brand expenses. Pay it quickly. I do not want to deal with annoying late fees just because you are too busy playing in the dirt with truck drivers." I stared at her in sheer disbelief. I told her firmly that these were not business expenses. This was a luxury vacation. Vivian leaned over my desk, her face twisted in a nasty sneer. She told me I would not understand because I had absolutely zero class. She said she had a crucial image to uphold, an image that elevated our entire family status, while I just hid in a dirty, smelly warehouse like a common blue-collar worker. She told me to just shut up, do my job, and pay the bill. Then she turned on her heel and walked out, leaving the strong scent of expensive perfume lingering in the dusty air. I paid the bill. I swallowed the burning anger in my throat. I told myself it was just money, and the fragile peace in the family was worth the financial price. I kept my head down, worked even harder, and kept the supply chain flowing. I endured the blatant disrespect because I was just too exhausted to fight. Fighting with them was a full-time job I simply did not have the energy for. But what I did not know then was that my tolerance was a ticking time bomb. The countdown had already started, and it was going to detonate at a dinner that would change everything forever. But how exactly did a simple celebration turn into the catalyst for total destruction? If you are watching this video right now, I need you to pause for a second and brace yourself. If you have ever been the black sheep, the designated scapegoat, or the unwilling financial mule of your own family, this next part is going to make your blood boil. The sheer audacity of what happened that night is something I still struggle to wrap my logical mind around. It was a rainy Friday evening in late autumn. Vivian was hosting a lavish dinner party to celebrate the 3-year anniversary of her boutique. The exact same boutique that had not turned a single dollar of actual profit in 36 months. The exact same boutique whose exorbitant rent I paid, whose electricity I kept turned on, and whose unsold inventory was bought entirely with my credit line. She booked a massive private dining room at one of the most exclusive, ridiculously expensive restaurants in the heart of the city. Crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, thick white linen tablecloths, waiters in tailored suits carrying silver trays. The kind of place where a tiny appetizer costs $50 and a glass of sparkling water is highway robbery. I had been working a grueling, brain-melting 14-hour shift. One of our major cross-country freight shipments had been severely delayed by a massive winter storm up north, and I spent the entire day glued to my phone and computer, frantically rerouting trucks, negotiating overtime with tired drivers, and fixing a massive logistics nightmare to save a client's contract. I was running on 3 cups of cheap, bitter office coffee and sheer, stubborn willpower. I simply did not have the time to drive all the way home, shower, and change into a fancy cocktail dress. I drove my modest sedan straight from the industrial warehouse district to the valet stand at the luxury restaurant. I was wearing my standard work uniform, dark blue slacks, a plain, slightly wrinkled light blue button-down shirt, and sensible flat shoes. I was perfectly clean, but I certainly did not look like a millionaire lifestyle founder. I looked exactly like someone who worked for a living. I walked into the private dining room, shaking the rain out of my hair. The long table was stunning. There were massive, towering floral centerpieces that probably cost $1,000 each, multiple expensive bottles of vintage wine already opened and breathing, and a lavish spread of imported cheeses and caviar. Thaddeus and Gwendolyn were dressed to the nines, laughing loudly and sipping champagne as if they owned the place. Vivian was seated at the head of the table, wearing a custom-tailored designer dress that shimmered in the low light, holding court with a small group of her wealthy, unemployed friends. I walked in quietly, not wanting to disrupt the loud toast she was currently giving to her own brilliance. I gave a small, tired nod to my parents as I approached. Thaddeus glanced at my practical outfit, frowned deeply, and shook his head slightly. Gwendolyn gave me a look of mild embarrassment, as if my presence was a stain on the white tablecloth. I ignored their looks. I was exhausted. I was just there to show support, eat a quick hot meal, pay the massive bill I knew was coming, and go home to sleep in my own bed. I walked toward the only empty chair left at the long table, which happened to be right next to my parents, situated near the head of the table where Vivian sat. I reached out, placed my hand on the back of the heavy, ornate wooden chair, and began to pull it out to sit down. Before I could even bend my knees, Vivian moved. She moved faster than I had ever seen her move in her entire life. She reached out with her manicured hand, grabbed the back of the chair, and violently jerked it away from me. The thick wooden legs scraped loudly and harshly against the polished marble floor. The sharp, grating sound echoed sharply through the quiet private room, cutting through the soft jazz music playing overhead. Every single conversation at the table stopped instantly. The music seemed to fade away. The waiters standing by the walls froze in place. I stumbled forward slightly, catching my balance on the edge of the table. I looked down at my sister, genuinely confused by her sudden aggression. I thought maybe the chair was broken, or maybe someone else was supposed to sit there. I asked her quietly what she was doing. Vivian did not lower her voice. She wanted an audience. She wanted a show. She looked me up and down, her eyes full of raw, unfiltered disgust, taking in my plain shirt, my tired face, and my flat, sensible shoes. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest and tilted her head back. "Are you seriously trying to sit here looking like that?" she hissed, her voice dripping with pure venom. "This is a luxury celebration for my brand. I have potential investors and important clients sitting at this table. I am not having you ruin my carefully curated aesthetic with your depressing warehouse vibe." I stood there, feeling the heat rise rapidly in my cheeks. My heart started pounding. I told her I just got off a 14-hour shift. I told her I was just trying to sit down and eat dinner with our parents. Vivian scoffed loudly, a harsh, ugly sound. She looked at her wealthy friends, seeking their approval, then looked back at me with a smirk. "I do not care where you just came from. You look like a janitor. I do not sit with poor, useless losers. It is terrible for my brand image. Go find a seat at the bar out in the back, or better yet, just leave the gift and go home. You are ruining the vibe." The silence in the room was deafening. I felt a cold, sharp spike of adrenaline hit my chest. Poor, useless loser. She called me a poor, useless loser in front of a dozen people at a dinner that was currently being charged to a credit card with my name clearly printed on the front of it. I slowly turned my head to look at my parents. I looked at the two people I had been financially supporting for years. I waited for my father to stand up. I waited for Thaddeus to use his booming voice to demand respect for family. I waited for Gwendolyn to scold her spoiled daughter for such incredibly cruel behavior. Instead, Thaddeus took a slow sip of his expensive wine, looked up at the crystal chandelier, and chuckled nervously. Gwendolyn waved her hand dismissively at me, treating me like an annoying fly. She smiled a tight, enabling smile. "Oh, Maeve, you know how sensitive Vivian is about her special events. Just go sit on the side sofa by the wall, dear. Do not make a huge scene. We are trying to have a nice, elegant evening." They laughed. They actually laughed. My own parents agreed with her. They truly thought I was going to lower my head, apologize for existing, and go sit in the dark corner like a punished dog, while they ate $1,000 steaks funded entirely by my grueling labor. For 31 years, I had bent over backwards. I gave up my college fund. I gave up my birthdays. I gave up my peace of mind. I gave them hundreds of thousands of dollars in hard cash. And in return, I was designated a poor, useless loser who was not even fit to sit at the table I was paying for. The snap inside my brain finally happened. The bone-deep exhaustion vanished entirely. The desperate, pathetic need for their approval evaporated into thin air. I felt a sudden, terrifying, and beautiful sense of absolute clarity. The heavy fog of familial guilt that had blinded me for decades lifted entirely. I stood up perfectly straight. I looked directly into Vivian's smug, arrogant eyes. I did not yell. I did not cry. My voice was dangerously calm, low enough that she had to lean in slightly to hear me. "You just made a very expensive mistake." Vivian rolled her eyes dramatically and turned her back to me, picking up her crystal champagne glass. "Whatever, Maeve. Close the door on your way out. And leave the corporate card at the front desk to cover the tab." I did not say another word. I turned around, walked steadily out of the private room, walked past the confused hostess, and stepped out the front doors of the restaurant. I stepped out into the cool, rainy night air, and for the first time in my entire adult life, I felt wonderfully, powerfully free. But freedom was just the first step. The second step was dismantling their world. The long drive home was perfectly silent. I did not turn on the radio. I did not play any music. I just listened to the steady hum of my car engine and the rhythmic sound of the windshield wipers pushing the cold rain away. I was not plotting revenge. Revenge implies messy emotion, unchecked anger, and unpredictable chaos. I was plotting a systemic, clinical shutdown. I was a professional logistics expert, and I was about to execute the most efficient, brutal cancellation of services in family history. My parents and my sister had built a comfortable, luxurious empire on my infrastructure, and I was finally pulling the plug from the wall. As soon as I walked through my front door, I did not even bother taking off my wet shoes. I walked straight down the hallway to my home office, flipped on the bright overhead fluorescent lights, and booted up my main computer. While the system loaded, I picked up my cell phone and dialed the only family member who had ever spoken the truth about them. My uncle Alastair. He was Thaddeus's younger brother. Alastair was a retired corporate accountant, a sharp, highly pragmatic, no-nonsense man who had been essentially excommunicated from the family 10 years ago. Why? Because he dared to look at Gwendolyn at a Thanksgiving dinner and tell her she was spending money like a fool and heading straight for bankruptcy. He had always been kind to me, sending small birthday cards with $10 bills when I was a kid, but I had kept my distance in recent years to avoid triggering my mother's wrath. Not anymore. I needed his brain. He answered on the third ring, his voice gruff with sleep. Maeve? It is nearly 10 o'clock. Is everything all right? Uncle Alastair, I said, my voice eerily steady. You were right about them. About all of them. The Bank of Maeve is officially closing its doors. I heard him shift on the other end of the line, exhaling a deep, long breath. What finally did it? What did they do? I told him everything. I gave him the short, unedited version of the dinner party. The brutal chair pull. The vicious insult in front of strangers. The sickening laughter of my own parents. Alastair did not express pity. He expressed grim, validated satisfaction. I told you, kid. 10 years ago I told you. You cannot buy love from people who only worship themselves. So, what is the action plan? I am cutting everything. Tonight. Right now. I just need to know if there are any legal blowbacks I am missing before I detonate this. Alastair cleared his throat, his accountant brain instantly engaging. Let's review. You are the financial guarantor on the boutique lease, not the primary tenant. You can pull your financial backing, but there is usually a steep penalty fee outlined in the contract. Pay the fee, wash your hands, and the landlord will evict her within 30 days. The luxury cars are registered in your LLC, right? That is corporate property. Take it back, it is yours. As for your parents' mortgage, unless your name is physically on the property deed, you are just a voluntary third-party payer. Stop the bank transfers. They cannot do a damn thing legally to force you to pay. Just make sure you lock down your own credit so they don't try to open cards in your name. Alastair paused, his voice softening slightly. Do it, Maeve. Burn the bridge. Let it burn bright. I thanked him, hung up the phone, and cracked my knuckles. The dual monitors in front of me glowed brightly. The deadly awakening had officially begun. Step 1. The luxury credit cards. I logged directly into my secure corporate banking portal. I navigated through the menus to the secondary card issued to Vivian. The current balance displayed on the screen was over $12,000, mostly accumulating from the lavish dinner she was currently eating and the designer clothes she was wearing. I clicked the small red button that said Deactivate Card. A security prompt popped up asking for a reason for deactivation. I typed out cardholder abuse in the text box and hit Confirm. The account locked instantly. Her magical plastic ticket to high society was now just a useless, heavy piece of garbage. Step 2. The parents' mortgage. I opened a new tab and logged into my personal checking account. I went to the recurring automated transfers section. There it was, glaring at me. The monthly scheduled payment of $5,200, set to be wired to their bank in exactly 3 days. I stared at that large number for several long seconds. I thought about Thaddeus laughing while his spoiled daughter called me a useless loser. I moved the mouse and hit delete. The final confirmation screen popped up. Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring payment? Yes. I clicked it. The recurring payment vanished into the digital ether. They were now officially, entirely responsible for keeping the roof over their own heads. Step 3. The boutique lease. I opened my business email client and drafted a formal, legally binding notice addressed to the commercial landlord of Vivian's retail store. I stated clearly that effective immediately, my LLC was officially withdrawing as the financial guarantor for the property located downtown. I authorized the immediate payment of the early withdrawal penalty fee, which was $5,000. $5,000 was a small, reasonable price to pay for permanent freedom. I attached the necessary digital signatures, reviewed the document twice, and hit send. Without my financial backing, Vivian's terrible, ruined credit meant the strict landlord would issue an eviction notice within the week. Step 4. Home security. My parents and my sister all possess spare keys to my house. They routinely use my home like a free storage unit and a complimentary hotel whenever they felt like dropping by. I pulled up a local search engine and found a 24-hour emergency locksmith service. I called and happily agreed to pay their exorbitant premium emergency fee. The tired-looking locksmith arrived at my house at 1 a.m. in a white van. I sat on my front porch with a hot cup of tea while he changed the front deadbolt, the back patio door, and reset the garage keypad code. By 2 a.m, my home fortress was impenetrable. I went back into my office and printed out a massive stack of documents. Bank statements, transfer receipts, credit card bills spanning 3 years. I organized them neatly into a thick manila folder. I wanted the physical evidence ready for when the inevitable denial started. When I finally went to bed, it was almost 3 a.m. I expected to feel highly anxious. I expected to feel the heavy, crushing guilt that Gwendolyn had programmed into my brain since childhood. But as I laid my head on the soft pillow, I felt nothing but a profound, sweeping sense of peace. The heavy, suffocating chains I had been carrying for years were finally gone. I closed my eyes with a genuine smile on my face. Tomorrow morning, the storm was going to hit them hard, and I was going to sit back and watch it rain. I woke up the next morning at 8 o'clock. The rain had stopped, and pale sunlight was streaming through my bedroom window. I felt rested, energized, and wonderfully calm. I made my bed, walked into the kitchen, made myself a proper, hot breakfast, poured a large cup of premium coffee, and sat comfortably at my kitchen island. I had deliberately left my cell phone on silent, face down in the living room all night. At exactly 9 a.m, I decided it was time to check the initial damage report. I walked into the living room, picked up the phone, and tapped the dark screen. The notifications flooded in like a waterfall. 37 missed calls. 52 unread text messages. The chaos had officially started. Most of the frantic calls were from Vivian. The first text message arrived at 11:15 the previous night, right around the exact time she probably tried to hand my deactivated card to the waiter to pay the massive bill for her private dinner. The text read, "Why is my card declining? Fix it right now. The restaurant manager is looking at me." 10 minutes later, another text arrived. "Maeve, answer your damn phone. This is so embarrassing. I am having to use my personal overdraft to pay for this." By midnight, the tone shifted drastically from demanding to furious. "You spiteful little witch. You turned it off on purpose, didn't you? Turn it back on now or I swear I will make you regret this." Then came the messages from Gwendolyn, sent early this morning around 7. The text read, "Maeve, what kind of childish, petty game are you playing? Your sister was humiliated in front of her important friends last night. She has been crying her eyes out all morning in her room. Call me immediately and apologize to her. Open that credit card back up right now. She needs to buy new inventory today for a client." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my hot coffee. The flavor was incredible. I set the mug down on the counter and typed out a single, precise response to a group chat containing both my parents and my furious sister. I typed, "The supply chain is broken. The accounts are closed. The ATM is permanently out of order. Manage your own lives from now on." I hit send. Within 3 seconds, my phone started ringing loudly in my hand. It was Thaddeus calling. I watched his name flash aggressively on the bright screen, then I calmly pressed the red decline button. I went into my settings and blocked all 3 of their numbers. I did not need to hear their screaming voices. I did not need to participate in their manufactured drama anymore. I had made my statement clearly. But I knew Thaddeus very well. He was a man who deeply believed that volume equaled authority. If he could not reach me on the phone to yell at me, he would try to enforce his dominance in person. Less than 30 minutes later, I heard the aggressive, loud screech of heavy tires pulling sharply into my concrete driveway. I walked quietly to the front living room window and peered carefully through the plastic blinds. It was Thaddeus's large silver SUV. He slammed the car door shut, his face bright red with visible rage, and stomped heavily up my front steps. I watched silently as he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his heavy metal key ring. He aggressively shoved his old spare key into my brand new brass deadbolt and tried to turn it. The key jammed immediately. He pulled it out, looked at it confused, muttered something angry under his breath, and tried shoving it in again. Still locked. He grabbed the door handle and jiggled it violently, rattling the frame. Then, the sudden realization hit him. He took a step back, looking closely at the shiny, brand-new brass lock mechanism. His face went from bright red to a deep, dangerous shade of purple. He raised his fist and began pounding heavily against my solid wooden front door. I could hear his voice muffled through the wood. "Maeve, open this door right now. Do you hear me? You do not lock out your own father. Open this damn door." I stood perfectly still in the hallway, sipping my coffee, watching his blurry silhouette through the frosted glass panels. I did not say a single word. I did not move an inch. I just let him throw his adult tantrum on my porch. He pounded on the heavy door for another 5 solid minutes, yelling loudly about family respect, duty, and ungrateful children. But a newly installed locked door does not argue back. A locked door does not negotiate with bullies. Eventually, he realized he was just an old, angry man screaming at a piece of wood in a quiet, peaceful suburban neighborhood. A neighbor walking their golden retriever stopped on the sidewalk and stared openly at him. Embarrassed by the audience, Thaddeus quickly lowered his fist, pointed a warning finger at the door as if I could see it clearly, and stomped back down the steps to his car. He threw it into reverse and sped off, leaving black tire marks on my concrete driveway. If you are listening to this story, and you are currently in a situation where you feel trapped by toxic family members, let me tell you a powerful secret. Their power over you is entirely an illusion. It is a bluff. They rely entirely on your fear of conflict and your deep desire for peace to maintain their control over you. When you remove yourself from the conflict, when you simply stop reacting to their anger and start acting for yourself, they have absolutely no idea what to do. They panic. And watching them panic outside my window was the most satisfying thing I had ever experienced. But the morning tantrum on my porch was just the mild appetizer. The real, crushing financial consequences had not even hit them yet. They still stubbornly thought this was a temporary fight. They still foolishly believed they could bully me into opening the vault again within a few days. They had no idea that the large mortgage payment was canceled. They had no idea the commercial landlord was currently drafting an eviction notice. And Vivian had no idea that the expensive luxury car sitting in her driveway was about to vanish into the night. The storm had officially made landfall, and they had zero shelter left. Thank you so much for watching the story so far. If you are enjoying this drama and want to see how the rest of their fake empire falls to pieces, please take a quick second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps out. Now, let's get back to the destruction. The first major domino to fall was the luxury car. It is funny how people who do not earn their own money quickly forget who actually owns the things they use every day. Vivian had been driving that sleek, imported BMW for 2 years. She treated it like her royal chariot. She posted endless photos of her manicured hands gripping the leather steering wheel, always making sure the expensive logo was perfectly centered in the frame. She genuinely believed that because she possessed the keys, the car belonged to her. She forgot one crucial, undeniable fact. The car was purchased, registered, and insured under my corporate logistics company for tax deduction purposes. I was the sole legal owner. She was just a temporary, ungrateful guest in the driver's seat. It was late Tuesday night, just 3 days after the disastrous dinner party. The rain had cleared up, leaving the city streets slick and reflecting the amber glow of the streetlights. I sat in the passenger seat of my company fleet manager's car. His name was David, a quiet, giant man who handled all the vehicle logistics for my warehouse. I had called him earlier that afternoon, explained the situation briefly, and asked for a favor. He did not ask questions. He just nodded and drove. We pulled into Vivian's upscale apartment complex right around midnight. The neighborhood was dead silent. People who do not work real jobs usually sleep very soundly. We slowly cruised past the manicured hedges and the decorative fountains until we spotted it. The dark gray BMW was parked perfectly in her reserved, covered space. It looked pristine, freshly washed, probably using the credit card I had just shut off. I stepped out of David's car into the cool night air. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the heavy metal spare key fob. I had kept it in my office safe since the day I bought the car. I walked up to the driver's side door. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not feel bad for leaving her stranded. I just felt a cold, calculating sense of justice. I pressed the unlock button. The car beeped twice softly, and the orange lights flashed in the dark. I opened the door, slid into the premium leather seat, and pressed the ignition button. The engine purred to life instantly, a smooth, powerful sound that I had been paying for every single month. I adjusted the rearview mirror, put the car in reverse, and backed out of her reserved spot. I gave a quick nod to David, who followed closely behind me in his own car. We drove the BMW straight back to my secure, gated warehouse lot. I parked it in the back corner, locked the gates, and handed the keys to David to process for sale the next morning. It was incredibly simple. No screaming, no arguing, no dramatic confrontation. Just a silent, legal repossession of my own property. The real entertainment began the next morning. I was sitting at my desk reviewing shipping manifests when my office phone rang. It was not my family. It was a local police officer. He identified himself politely and asked if he was speaking to the registered owner of a gray BMW sedan. I told him he was. He cleared his throat. He said they had a very distressed young woman in their precinct lobby named Vivian, who was loudly reporting that her vehicle had been stolen in the middle of the night. The officer sounded tired, likely having dealt with her screaming for the last hour. I smiled, looking out the window at the sunny warehouse yard. I spoke clearly and professionally. I told the officer the vehicle was definitely not stolen. I explained that the car was corporate property registered to my business, and I had simply retrieved it from a former authorized user because she was no longer permitted to drive it. I offered to email him the title, the corporate registration, and my identification to clear up the matter immediately. The officer sighed heavily, a sound of profound relief. He told me that would be perfect, and he apologized for bothering me at work. Before he hung up, I heard the muffled sound of Vivian's voice in the background, demanding to know if they had found the criminal who took her baby. I heard the officer speak to her plainly. His voice carried through the receiver just before the line went dead. He told her, "Ma'am, your sister just confirmed she took the car back. She owns it. It is a civil matter, not a theft. You need to leave the station now or I will cite you for wasting police time." I hung up the phone and laughed out loud in my empty office. I could perfectly picture the exact look on her face. The sheer, devastating realization that she could not throw a tantrum to get her way with the law. She could not cry to a police officer the way she cried to our mother. The illusion of her ownership was shattered. But the loss of the car was nothing compared to the digital destruction that was about to unfold, courtesy of our own meddling relatives. Every toxic family has a network of flying monkeys. These are the relatives or family friends who are manipulated by the main abusers into doing their dirty work. They thrive on drama, they love to gossip, and they blindly believe whatever narrative fits their own jealous agenda. In my family, the ultimate flying monkey was my older cousin, Sybil. Sybil was a bored, miserable woman who spent her entire life scrolling through social media, judging everyone, and desperately trying to climb the social ladder. She was deeply jealous of my financial independence, but she constantly sucked up to Vivian because Vivian threw fancy parties and knew wealthy people. When Vivian's world started collapsing that Wednesday morning, Sybil was the first person Gwendolyn called to rally the troops and spin the narrative. By noon, my phone started buzzing with notifications from distant relatives. I opened my social media application, and right at the very top of my feed was a massive, dramatic post from Sybil. It was a masterpiece of manufactured victimhood. Sybil had tagged half the family in a long, weeping paragraph. She wrote about how wealth changes people for the worse. She called me a heartless, Greedy monster who had suddenly and maliciously stolen a car right out of my own sister's driveway in the dead of night. She painted a tragic picture of my poor, aging parents being pushed into a corner by a cruel daughter who had lost all sense of family loyalty. It was a disgusting, manipulative smear campaign designed to pressure me into backing down through public shame. Attached to the long paragraph was a photograph. Sybil had driven over to Vivian's apartment that morning to comfort her. The photo showed Vivian sitting at her kitchen island, wearing a designer silk robe, holding a tissue to her face, looking utterly devastated and fragile. It was meant to garner deep sympathy. But Sybil was not very smart, and Vivian was entirely careless. They were so focused on staging the perfect crying photo that they did not pay attention to what was sitting on the kitchen counter right next to Vivian's elbow. The camera on Sybil's expensive phone was very high resolution. When I clicked on the photo, I noticed a stack of mail scattered on the marble counter. I zoomed in. Right there, perfectly in focus, was a thick stack of aggressively red letters. The top letter was fully opened and laid flat. It was an official notice from the Federal Tax Authority. It was a massive tax lien for unpaid business taxes on the boutique. Right next to it was a credit card statement, torn open, with the total balance due printed in bold, unavoidable black ink. $62,000. I did not have to say a single word. I did not have to defend myself in the comment section. The internet did the work for me. Within an hour, the comment section under Sybil's tearjerker post shifted from sympathy to sheer, ruthless mockery. Vivian's so-called wealthy friends, the ones who followed Sybil to keep up with the gossip, saw the zoomed-in screenshots that someone else had posted in the comments. The rich crowd is incredibly unforgiving when they realize someone is faking their status. One comment read, "Wait, is that a tax lien on the counter? I thought the boutique was making millions?" Another person chimed in, $62,000 in credit card debt? No wonder the sister took the car back. This girl is totally broke. A third person, one of the girls who was at the dinner party, wrote, "She was literally calling her sister a poor loser last night, and now we find out the sister was paying for her entire life." This is the funniest thing I have seen all year. I watched the notifications roll in, drinking a bottle of cold water at my desk. The fake, luxurious image Vivian had spent years and hundreds of thousands of my dollars building was disintegrating in real time. The flying monkey had accidentally launched a nuclear missile at her own commander. Sybil panicked and hastily deleted the entire post, but the damage was already permanently done. Screenshots live forever. Group chats were already buzzing. The boutique investors she had been trying to impress canceled their meetings. Her fake friends stopped returning her calls. The aesthetic was ruined. But the final nail in Vivian's professional coffin did not come from the internet. It came from a man who refused to be scammed. Please do not click away, because the moment Vivian's arrogance was crushed by a complete stranger is the exact moment this story peaks. You see, when a narcissist is backed into a corner, they do not apologize. They double down. They try to spin an even bigger lie to cover up the truth. Despite losing the corporate car, despite her credit card being locked, and despite the humiliating social media disaster, Vivian was still desperately trying to save face with her remaining high society friends. She had previously promised her social circle that she was going to do a massive $50,000 luxury renovation on her boutique to prove the business was thriving. She was determined to sign a contract with a high-end commercial contractor named Lucian to make it look like she had endless capital. Lucian was a highly respected, no-nonsense professional in our city. He designed interiors for the elite. He was also a man who ran incredibly strict background and financial checks on all his clients before he ever picked up a hammer because he hated wasting his time with people who could not pay their bills. It was Thursday afternoon. I had to meet Uncle Alistair at a coffee shop right across the street from Vivian's boutique to sign some final legal documents transferring the LLC assets. We were sitting at a window table, sipping espresso, when I saw a sleek black truck pull up to the front of the boutique. A tall man in a tailored suit and a hard hat stepped out, carrying a leather portfolio. It was Lucian. Vivian was standing on the sidewalk outside her store, surrounded by 3 of her snooty friends. She was pointing at the storefront windows, laughing loudly, clearly pretending that everything was perfectly fine and the renovation was moving forward. Alistair nudged my arm and pointed out the window. "Watch this," he muttered, a knowing smirk on his face. Lucian does not suffer fools. We watched from across the street as Lucian approached the group. Vivian greeted him with a fake, overly enthusiastic smile. She extended her hand. Lucian did not shake it. He stopped a few feet away, opened his leather portfolio, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I could not hear the exact words being exchanged at first, but body language tells a perfect story. Vivian was gesturing widely, talking fast. Lucian stood perfectly still, his face carved from stone. He looked down at the paper, then looked directly into her eyes. Alistair and I walked out of the coffee shop and stood on the corner, just close enough to hear the end of the conversation over the city traffic. Lucian's voice was deep, authoritative, and carried clearly. "Ms. Brooks, I do not care about your vision board. I care about numbers. I ran the standard credit and financial background check you authorized yesterday. Your personal credit score is effectively garbage. Your business accounts show zero revenue and massive, defaulting debt." Vivian's face flushed a deep, ugly crimson. Her friends stopped smiling and stared at Lucian in shock. Vivian stammered, trying to lower her voice. "There is a mistake at the bank. My family is very wealthy. We have guarantors." Lucian did not lower his voice at all. He was entirely indifferent to her embarrassment. "You do not have a guarantor anymore. The commercial landlord informed me this morning that the LLC backing your lease has officially withdrawn all support. The landlord is preparing eviction papers. The only reason your bills were ever paid was because a woman named Maeve Brooks was funding your entire existence. I build luxury spaces for successful people. I do not do business with frauds." He closed his leather portfolio with a sharp, definitive snap. He turned around, walked back to his truck, and drove away, leaving Vivian standing on the sidewalk in absolute, crushing silence. Her three friends looked at her. The illusion was dead. The curtain had been pulled back, and the great wizard was just a broke, insecure girl drowning in debt. One of the friends muttered something about having a prior engagement, turned on her heel, and walked quickly down the street. The other two followed immediately. Vivian was left standing entirely alone in front of a failing store she would be kicked out of in less than 30 days. I stood on the corner with Alistair. I did not wave. I did not gloat. I just watched her pull her phone out with shaking hands. The supply chain was broken, and she was finally starving. But the real architects of this disaster were still under the delusion that they held power over me. My parents. And they were about to play their final, pathetic hand. Friday morning arrived. The deadline for their monthly mortgage payment had officially passed at midnight. The bank had definitely sent them an automated alert that the transfer had failed. I knew Thaddeus would not take this lying down. He was a man who operated on intimidation. When yelling through a locked door failed, he escalated to formal threats. I was sitting in my main conference room at the logistics warehouse, going over quarterly projections with my team. The front desk receptionist buzzed my phone. She sounded nervous. She told me my parents were in the lobby, demanding to see me immediately, and they were threatening to cause a scene if I did not come out. I told my team to take a 10-minute break. I smoothed my plain button-down shirt, took a deep breath, and walked out to the reception area. Thaddeus and Gwendolyn were standing in the middle of the room. Thaddeus had his hands on his hips, trying to look imposing. Gwendolyn had her arms crossed, wearing her best expression of wounded martyrdom. I stopped a few feet away from them. I kept my voice flat, devoid of any emotion. I asked them what they wanted. Thaddeus pointed a thick finger at my chest. His voice echoed in the warehouse lobby. "You missed the mortgage payment, Maeve. The bank called us this morning. You are going to log into your account right now, in front of us, and fix this mistake. And then you are going to call your sister and beg for her forgiveness for stealing her car." I stared at him, marveling at the sheer audacity. I told him I did not make a mistake. I canceled the payment. I told him I would never pay another dime for his house, and I would certainly never apologize to Vivian for taking back my own property. Gwendolyn let out a dramatic, sobbing gasp. She stepped forward, trying to grab my arm, but I stepped back. Maeve, you are tearing this family apart. How can you be so cruel? We gave you life. You owe us. When the guilt trip failed to move me, Thaddeus played his final, desperate card. He puffed out his chest and used his most threatening, authoritative tone. If you do not wire that money right this second, Maeve, I am calling my lawyer. I will write you out of the will entirely. You will not get a single penny of our estate. You will get nothing when we pass. Do you hear me? Nothing. He thought that was the kill shot. He truly believed the promise of future wealth would force me back into submission. I was about to respond, but a door opened down the hallway. Uncle Alistair walked out. He had come by the office to drop off the final LLC documents. He walked right past me, holding a thick manila folder, and stood face to face with his older brother. Alistair looked at Thaddeus with a mixture of pity and intense disgust. What estate, Thaddeus? What inheritance are you threatening this girl with? Thaddeus blinked, startled by his brother's sudden appearance. Alistair, stay out of this. This is family business regarding my property. Alistair laughed, a dry, humorless sound. He opened the folder and pulled out a stack of public property records. He tossed them onto the glass reception table. Your property? You do not own a damn thing. I pulled the public records yesterday to help Maeve untangle her finances. You remortgaged that house 2 years ago to pump cash into Vivian's garbage store. Then you took out a massive line of credit against the remaining equity last year to pay off your own credit cards. Gwendolyn's face went shockingly pale. She reached out and gripped the edge of the glass table to keep her balance. Thaddeus opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Alistair leaned in closer. You are completely underwater. The bank owns 95% of that house. You have zero equity, zero savings, and zero assets to leave behind in any will. The only thing you have left to pass down is a mountain of debt. And now that Maeve has stopped paying the monthly premium, the bank is going to foreclose on you in 90 days. You have nothing to threaten her with. You are essentially bankrupt. The physical reaction was immediate. Thaddeus stumbled backward as if he had been punched in the chest. All the fake authority, all the booming bravado, melted right off his face, leaving only a terrified, old man. Gwendolyn let out a real, genuine whimper of fear, her hands shaking violently. They had built a house of cards, and Alistair had just turned on a giant industrial fan. The truth was finally out in the open. They were not wealthy benefactors. They were parasites, and the host had just cured herself. For the first time in 31 years, the power dynamic in the room shifted entirely to me. I was no longer the invisible daughter begging for a crumb of affection. I was no longer the frightened girl holding a college acceptance letter. I was the person holding the only lifeboat, and I was choosing to sail away without them. I walked over to the reception desk, picked up a single sheet of paper I had printed that morning, and walked back to my parents. I handed it directly to Thaddeus. His hands were shaking so badly the paper rustled. Look at the bottom line, I commanded. My voice was no longer flat. It was heavy, solid, and final. Thaddeus looked down. Gwendolyn leaned over his shoulder, her eyes wide with panic. The paper was a simple spreadsheet. It detailed every single mortgage payment, every lease transfer, every credit card bill, and every emergency cash injection I had provided over the last 36 months. At the very bottom, highlighted in bright yellow ink, was the grand total. $220,500. That is how much I have spent trying to buy your love, I said, looking right into my mother's tear-filled eyes. That is the cost of my tuition you stole. That is the cost of my birthdays you ignored. That is the cost of sitting at a table and being called a useless loser while you laughed. Thaddeus looked up from the paper. His voice was small, weak, and pathetic. Maeve, please. We did not know it was this bad. We will lose the house. Where will we go? I felt a brief, fleeting twinge of sadness, but I crushed it instantly under the weight of reality. You are adults. You will figure it out. You can sell the designer clothes. You can get jobs, but you will not get another single cent from me. I am not asking for this money back. Consider that $250,000 the final purchase price of my permanent freedom." I stepped back, pointing toward the heavy glass doors of the lobby. "The door is behind you. Do not ever come to my office or my home, ever again." They stood there for another 10 seconds, waiting for me to break. Waiting for the old Maeve to step forward, apologize for being harsh, and pull out a checkbook. But the old Maeve was dead and buried. When they finally realized I was entirely serious, they turned around in silence. Thaddeus looked 10 years older as he pushed the heavy glass door open. Gwendolyn followed him, her head hung low, defeated. They walked out to their car and they drove away. The fallout over the next month was swift and utterly brutal. Reality is a harsh teacher when you run out of other people's money. Without my LLC acting as a guarantor, the commercial landlord served Vivian with a formal eviction notice. She had 3 weeks to clear out the boutique. Since she had no money to hire movers, she had to pack up the cheap, unsold inventory in trash bags by herself. Her wealthy, handsome fiancé, a man who only dated her because he thought she came from a prominent, rich family, discovered the truth about her massive credit card debt and the tax lien. He broke off the engagement via a text message and moved to another city. Vivian had to move back into my parents' house. But the house did not belong to them for much longer. Realizing they could not afford the massive monthly payments and terrified of a forced bank foreclosure destroying their remaining credit, Thaddeus and Gwendolyn were forced to put the large family home on the market for a rapid, undervalued sale. They used the small amount of cash from the sale to pay off the bank, leaving them with almost nothing. They had to pack up their luxurious life and rent a tiny, cramped, 2-bedroom apartment on the gritty outskirts of town. 3 miserable, toxic people crammed into a small space, with no one left to blame but themselves. Their carefully constructed, fake luxury lifestyle collapsed into dust in less than 30 days. The empire was gone. The supply chain was permanently severed. And me? My life went in the exact opposite direction. Part 12, Peace and the Final Message. 1,100 words. 6 months have passed since that Friday morning in my office lobby. 6 months of glorious, uninterrupted peace. My house feels entirely different now. It is no longer a holding pen waiting for the next financial emergency. It is bright, quiet, and deeply comforting. I painted the living room walls a soft, warm color. I bought new furniture that I actually picked out for myself instead of buying whatever was on sale so I could save money for Vivian's rent. My bank accounts have recovered beautifully. The stress that used to sit heavily on my chest, a constant, crushing weight, has evaporated. I am currently standing in my bedroom, zipping up a large, sturdy suitcase. Tomorrow morning, I am getting on a plane and taking a 2-week, luxury cruise to Alaska. I have always wanted to see the massive glaciers and the wild mountains. For years, I postponed this trip because every time I saved up the money, my parents or my sister suddenly had a manufactured crisis that drained my travel fund. Not anymore. I paid for the premium cabin in full in cash. My phone on the nightstand buzzes softly. I look at the screen. It is Thaddeus. I did not block them permanently. Once the dust settled and they moved into their tiny apartment, I unblocked their numbers, strictly on my own terms. I wanted to see if they had learned anything. I answer the call. Hello. His voice is quiet, hesitant. There is no booming bravado anymore. Hi, Maeve. I hope I am not interrupting your packing. Just finishing up, I reply, keeping my tone polite but distant. I wanted to ask your advice on something. The transmission on the old car is slipping. The mechanic quoted a high price. I was wondering if, from a logistics standpoint, it makes more sense to repair it or try to finance a used one with our current credit. He is asking for advice. Not money. Not a handout. Not demanding I buy him a new car. He knows the vault is locked. He knows the boundaries are made of reinforced steel. I give him a brief, logical piece of advice about vehicle depreciation and repair costs. I keep the conversation under 3 minutes. I wish him a good week, and I hang up the phone. It is not a perfect relationship. It will never be a warm, loving, television family relationship. But it is a relationship built on the harsh reality of boundaries. I realized I could still love them from a distance, without constantly throwing myself on a grenade to save them from their own terrible choices. If there is one profound lesson I have learned from this entire nightmare, it is this: respect is not something you can ever buy. You cannot purchase loyalty with a mortgage payment. You cannot buy love with a luxury car. If someone's affection for you is directly tied to the limit on your credit card, they do not love you. They love what you provide. And sometimes, the absolute best investment you will ever make in your entire life is choosing to cut your losses on a toxic relationship. The night Vivian pulled that chair away, she thought she was proving to everyone that I did not belong at her wealthy, elite table. She was right, but not for the reason she thought. I did not belong at that table, because my value is not measured by the clothes I wear or the money I give away to ungrateful people. My value is inherent. So, I stopped trying to buy a seat. I walked away and I built my own table. It is a quiet table. It is peaceful. And the best part is, no one is allowed to sit here unless they bring genuine respect. I want to turn this over to you, the people listening to my story. My family is currently living in their cramped apartment, and my mother occasionally sends passive-aggressive texts hinting that they would love to have a family dinner soon to heal old wounds, as long as I promise not to bring up the past. If you were in my shoes, if you had survived all of this and finally found your peace, would you ever agree to sit down and share a meal with them again? Let me know your honest thoughts down below. Thank you so much for listening to my journey. If you found this story satisfying, or if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to save your own sanity, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your own experiences in the comments. We are not alone in this. I will see you all in the next video.